Major Lindsey and Africa presents Bouncing Back, conversations about resilience for lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major Lindsey and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a managing director in the associate practice group at Major Lindsey and Africa. In this podcast, I'll speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their careers and personal lives, and how they ultimately bounce back from those experiences to thrive. Today, my guest is Dan Huynh. Dan concentrates his practice on intellectual property and commercial matters, including patent, trademark, and other IP disputes. Dan represents companies of all sizes in various technology sectors, including wireless communications, e-commerce, and financial payment systems. Dan has experience with Section 337 investigations before the International Trade Commission, as well as district court litigations before federal courts across the United States. In addition, Dan advises clients on the creation, development, and management of IP portfolios, the acquisition and exploitation of IP rights through licensing or litigation, and the preparation of invalidity, non-infringement, and freedom to operate opinions. Dan also counsels clients on IP due diligence through the evaluation of client and competitor portfolios. Dan is recognized as a rising leader in the profession and provides his clients with results-driven and value-oriented representation. Prior to joining the firm, Dan spent the first 9 years of his career with the patent litigation group at Alston & Bird. As a first-generation attorney, Dan spends his time outside the practice, fostering the growth of minority attorneys throughout the United States. Dan, thank you for being my guest today.
Hey, Rebecca, good to be here.
Well, in a prior conversation, Dan, you mentioned that the Great Recession really impacted your early legal career. What happened?
Sure, and for folks out there, the recession we're talking about was in 2008 and 2009, and I had the good fortune of graduating from law school in 2009, and I remember my 3L year. There was a lot of news coming through, certain outlets, above the law and things like that about, certain recessions, legal budgets shrinking, and, associates at various law firms, getting laid off, offers getting rescinded. And so, coming into my 3L year, we were getting kind of news of kind of this slowing legal work. And, there was a lot of uncertainty, and looking back at it now, I don't think the law firms kind of knew what they were doing. And so, we went through our 3L year, graduated, took the bar, and traditionally, after you take the bar, the first year associates start around September, October, after taking the bar. During 2009, during the recession, those starting periods got pushed. Some, first it started was, we'll push it 2 months, we'll push it to the new year. Then they were going to push it just kind of a few months down the road. In my experience, the firm that I started at, they kind of gave, the associates an option of whether to go work at a public interest fellowship for a year, or just kind of sit at home and kind of wait until potentially there was more work to be done and they'd call us in. So that was kind of there was a lot of uncertainty at the time. And where I guess looking at the economy now and how law firms are kind of approaching kind of legal budgets now, it feels kind of very, very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember that time well. I graduated law school in 2006. Took the bar, had a job, but I was in real estate. And as we got closer to 2008, things started slowing down. I just remember it kind of fell off a cliff, in late 2008. Just got worse and worse and worse in 2009. And it's kind of terrifying for a bunch of different reasons. One, it's sort of your identity. You work so hard as a law school student to get through it and to pass the bar. But for myself, I had student loans and I was kind of freaking out, like, how am I going to pay these? This is not good. What did you do? What choice did you make in terms of whether to go work in public interest or go home or to do something else when you decided, to stick with Alston?
Sure. And I was very fortunate on Alston and Bird. They made the very generous offer of letting us, have a choice of going to public interest, and they'd give us a stipend, and we'd get a lot of experience through that year, either working with, a public defender or the DA's office, or, a nonprofit, and going down that path. Since I was going to be focused on IP and patent work, I kind of really wanted to kind of get that started. And traditionally, patents and IP litigation is generally recession proof. And so, I thought, well, perhaps if anyone was going to get called in first, it was going to be the patent folks, and that proven to be true. But I decided, let's stick it out, and I'd stay at home. And during that time, I found, other odds and end jobs. I tutored the LSAT for about 6 months. I taught a couple LSAT classes, did some private tutoring. I went so far as started tutoring high school students, chemistry, mathematics. I had to relearn calculus to teach those folks. It was truly, I mean, it was fun in the sense that, I got to like kind of relive, those kind of subject matters, things like that, and also take the LSAT again. But it was certainly, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, as you can imagine, of when we could start, and things like that. And I think I mentioned to you, I'd graduated from high school, moved on to Georgia Tech, lived on campus, went to Athens, lived on campus there. So it was 7 years since I lived at home. And then, after graduating, taking the bar, I had to go back and move back and live with my parents for a little bit until I got called up.
It's hard to go home when you're when you've been away for that long, and mom and dad are like, here, move into your old high school room. I think you mentioned they gave you a curfew again.
Yeah.
Oh, that's tough, for sure. It sounds like, Dan, you kind of coped with the situation and the unknowing, with keeping busy, right? And I was more curious if there were other sort of tactics or things that you've employed in order to get through this really difficult time, because it sounds like Alston was pretty generous, and there was some money coming in, and there was some way to kind of make a way. But mentally, for me at least, I'm remembering that time, the mental part was, I think, the most difficult. And I'm, for folks that might be in a similar situation right now, or fearing that a similar situation is going to be coming up the road, what other advice might you have for them?
Yeah, no, it was certainly tough because I don't think anyone plans on going to law school, and after you finish your summer associate, get an offer, plans on ever going back home and doing these certain things, and you certainly can fall in the trap of kind of feeling self-pity and doubt and anxiety. I think it seems kind of basic, but a lot of the things I did at the time was a lot of exercise, kind of working on just wellness, eating healthy. Those things don't really seem like it affects your mood, but it really does. So doing those certain things, also just talking to people. My mentors at Alston and Bird, and the partners I worked with during the summer there, I would be in constant contact with those folks, and so that was helpful. I didn't expect full clarity on what exactly was going to happen, because I think at that time no one really knew what was going to happen, and no one had a crystal ball to kind of see where the economy was going and what clients were doing. But just talking to those people and kind of being as candid as possible about how nervous you were, and I think that invites them to be candid to you about their plans and what they can do, because I think that was always kind of helpful. Doing other things, I said before, exercise, spending time with family. I mean, like, looking back, I was so glad that I could, spend time with my family and things like that, because once you start your career as an attorney, a lot of, unfortunately, being an associate at a big law firm or at any firm, it takes a lot of time. So, I'm glad that I got to spend some time doing things outside of just, the billable hour.
Your parents probably like that too.
I think so. Probably just to an extent, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how long did this period, for our listening audience, I'm curious, how long was it? How many months was it before you were called back to the firm and sort of allowed to kind of take on this associate role, full bore that you'd been offered back in law school before all the chaos of the Great Recession?
Sure. So I took the bar in July of 2009. Got the results later that year. We were supposed to start in September, and then the firm said, we're going to push it back from September to January 1. We'll see what happens. Ultimately, it was probably mid-March, so March 2010. So that was probably 6 months before I was originally supposed to start. And during that time, I said beforehand, I did a lot of tutoring, a lot of exercise. I actually did a little bit of a domestic family work. And apparently the joke that I always tell people is, divorces aren't recession proof. They're actually probably, recession motivated. So business was thriving for divorce lawyers out there. So did a little bit of that, and it's given me a little perspective that, I'm glad I'm stuck with IP, because that's probably more suited to my strengths.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. When I got out of real estate, I was like, what is recession proof? And I ended up getting into family law and stayed for a bit before I got into recruiting. But it was exactly what I was, your thought and my thoughts were aligned. I was like, what's recession proof? What is still going to be thriving? And for a good bit of time, family law, divorce law was recession proof. Things got so bad, in the bottom of 2009, 2010, that I think even, we were getting phone calls from people saying, I can't afford to get a divorce right now, because my husband or my wife or whatever, we're both laid off. But in a future date and time, I'll be calling you back. So for better or worse. So that makes complete and total sense to me. Being flexible, I think, is key in these kinds of situations. I'm curious, Dan. Your situation is much different now. You have a nice book of business. You are a partner at Morris Manning. You tell me you're on the hiring committee. You're helping to start make decisions for the firm. How did that formative experience impact the way you think about things now as a partner?
Sure. I think that one of the other things, before we move on, that I learned from, kind of the early kind of uncertain start of my career, and that certainly happened to a lot of other folks. I mean, I was very fortunate that I started with Alston, the firm that gave me an offer. A lot of my classmates certainly did not start at the firm that gave them an offer, and then they, a lot of them were going to be slated to be corporate M&A folks or real estate folks, as they kind of concentrated during their summer associate practice, and they had to pivot. And I'm sure, I talked to a bunch of them at the time, and it was a struggle, and it wasn't, their favored path, but they endured, and they made the best of it. And a lot of them pivoted in a way where now they're still practicing 12 years later, practicing in this, in their practice that they had to pivot to, and they love it. And others, who had offers at big law, had to work at small regional firms or local firms and work there for 3 to 4 years, and then, lateraled over to a bigger firm, and now they're thriving partners at these big law firms. So what it's told me, and in retrospect, is that there's a lot of ways to get to whatever practice you think is the one you want, that you think you're successful at. I was lucky that mine was a little more straightforward, but I had a lot of classmates who kind of took the road less traveled. And I think they're better lawyers for it. I think they're more grateful lawyers for it. And I certainly am too. I'm certainly, I don't take anything for granted. I think that's kind of a hard lesson learned from, the attorneys that graduated in the 08, 09, 2010 time period. And I think that's kind of made me, really appreciate the clients that have given me and trusted me with their work, that, I'm happy to have it. I'm grateful to have it, because I know that as hard as it was to get the work, it's really easy for them to switch to another provider, and so I don't take that for granted.
Absolutely, no, that's great. And then touches on I think gratitude is so important no matter what you're doing, and what you said touches on another question I wanted to ask, which I'm sure would be interesting to our listeners, which is how did you, starting off as an associate at Alston, kind of grow a book of business and get clients. We've talked about, I know that you were a first generation attorney, just as I am, when I was practicing, and curious about that piece of it, and how you sort of thought about building your book of business, building trust. I don't know if this might be me projecting, but one of the ways to ensure security is to have your own clients, and I would imagine that might have factored a little bit into the growth of your practice. But can you share a little bit about your thoughts, Dan, related to building a book of business and advice for junior associates who might be thinking they want to make partner at a firm versus going in house? Do you have any advice about that? About kind of how to embark on starting to build your own book?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different ways to do that. And I always tell people, law school prepares you for a lot of things, but it really doesn't prepare you for the actual practice of law. I always compare it to the LSAT prepares you for law school as much as law school prepares you for the bar, as much as the bar prepares you for the practice of law. I mean,
Yes.
You've got to kind of find your own way. I think there's so many ways to build your own business, and you kind of find the way that it works for you. I think what's common among the folks that have large practices and large books of business is at a base level, you need to master the craft to some extent. So I always tell my associates, the first 2 to 3 years that you're in practice, your only job is to kind of master the craft, to be the best attorney that you can be, best associate you can be. Learn, if you're an M&A, kind of learn the deal, how deals work, what motivates your clients to do certain things. For litigation, really understand how to write, to research. You got to have those basic skills first. I think it's an evolution. When you're starting to come third, fourth, fifth years, really understand what the client wants and what the partners want, and how your clients think. I think that's always important, because you really can't sell value and provide value to your clients unless unless you know kind of what their motivations are, what keeps them up at night. And even being proactive about, they may not be thinking about things, but you want to let your clients and potential clients and your contacts know that you're thinking about them. There's sometimes I read articles and I think, oh, this is something that my clients should know about, and I'll forward it to them. And to let them know that I'm thinking about them and I'm thinking about their practice, even if I'm not billing. And so, I think what I've done, and it's still, I'm still not perfect at it, and I still working on it, is it's kind of like growing a skill set of and habits of making sure that your clients know that you're thinking about them, and that you have their best interests at heart. And then also at the end of the day, coming into a relationship knowing and knowing that you can provide actual value to their situation.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. Law school doesn't teach you how to sell. And this is ultimately what you're being asked to do as a partner in a law firm. No, great advice for our listening audience, Dan. To me, thinking about some of the questions that I was getting from junior folks in 2020 and early 2021, when things kind of came a little bit to a screeching halt due to COVID, and also sort of reflecting back on my time, dealing with the Great Recession personally, it takes a lot of resilience to be a lawyer, right? There are folks that probably, in your midst or from your law school class back in 2009 who just threw their hands up and said, I'm not doing this. This is a sign from the universe that I don't need to be in the law. Let me go be a yoga instructor. Let's go back to my former profession or whatever. There were other folks that may have become depressed and had a hard time kind of, powering through. And I think there's a good bit of resilience that it takes to get through something like that, like job loss or
Yeah.
Reductions and a difficult time worldwide. But it also takes some resilience to build a book of business, because I'm sure there have been times where people have said no thank you, or they've gone to the competitor across the street or whatever. It happens. You can't win them all. I'm curious where the strength and knowledge, help or assistance to be resilient comes from for you.
Well, I think, it's kind of funny. I mean, like, I think most of the folks that go to law school, they really They really never they probably professionally and academically have rarely ever experienced failure.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so hard when, your first no's that you get are probably from when you're applying to law firms, and, you're getting no's there, and, you first, then you get a job, and then you lose your first motion or lose your first case. Because, litigation, oftentimes is a zero sum game. There's going to be, a party that, wins a motion or loses a motion or gets the verdict or not. And it can be hard. I mean, because I think when you're litigating at this kind of level, it's sometimes all encompassing, and it takes part of your life because you're spending so much time on it. And then you get a verdict that doesn't go your way. Especially in my case, I become very good friends. I have good relationships with my clients, and so I partner with them, and so I feel the loss as much as they do. And for me, and earlier in my career, I took it hard, and I still take it hard now. But I always think to myself, how great is it that I get to do this for a living? That I get to achieve, help people in need, whether it's businesses or whatever, and they're trusting me to kind of help them get out of this tough situation. And I always tell them, I don't guarantee results. We can
Yeah.
never do that. What
Yeah.
I can guarantee you them is I'll be thoughtful and intentional about it. I'll give them good solid legal advice. That doesn't guarantee results. And if I do that and I lose a case, there's a little glimpse of kind of something I can hold on to say, I still gave them the best I could. I can't guarantee results there. So that helps sort of with resiliency. Also, just to know that, look, you're not defined by one loss, whether it's a law firm saying no to you, or getting laid off, if that happens to you, or losing a case. That doesn't define you. I think what defines you is how you bounce back from it. A good example of it is, I had one senior associate who got skipped over for partnership. And then there was no fault of that person. It was just that the pipeline of attorneys and partners that were getting promoted in that class was just in a way that she had to get skipped a year. And I told her, it's easier to give advice than take advice. I completely understand that, but I told her, you know what, we're all going to be looking at you to see how you, act and bounce back from the news that you're going to get skipped for partnership. And then that really defines who you are, and also defines, your perspective on the practice of law and being at this firm. And she did a great job, and she made partner the next year. And I'm very sure that obviously she'd want to make partner earlier, but that it really didn't. It only affected her in a positive manner. That she's taken it as extra motivation to kind of just to propel and exceed in your career.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I have a friend who used to tell me, everything happens for a reason, and it's hard to stomach when you're really invested in a certain particular outcome.
Yeah.
But I think that's true. I think, not to sound sort of hokey or spiritual, the universe has a plan in some form or fashion, and sometimes that failed experience or that hiccup or that bumps, catapult you into doing something much better, or being better at the thing that you want to do. So I think that's great advice. Well, we're getting close to time here, and I want to ask you one last question, Dan. The last few years have been particularly difficult for everyone, due to COVID, the murder of George Floyd, certain other world events. I think there's a lot of attorneys who are junior at law firms these days who were not in, the market during the last recession, and weren't able to learn those lessons firsthand. And I was wondering, what advice you would give newly minted attorneys who may not have experienced this type of industry tumult or personal tumult before.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. What I would say, the best piece of advice I got was, just don't be in a rush. The practice of law in your career is going to be 30, 35 years. And, I get it. law students are competitive, lawyers are competitive. That kind of personality trait kind of lends itself to going to law school and seeking a legal career. And we're all competitive to a point, but don't rush it. Don't rush getting your first job and thinking that this is the most important job in the world. There's a lot of people who, and as you know, Rebecca, switch careers and they lateral over and to do something else and pivot to do something else. So just don't be in a rush to it, because to my point about the person who got skipped over for partnership, it's not a race to become partner in 7 years, and if that's your goal, which is fine. It's a fine goal to have, but it shouldn't be the ultimate goal. Because it may happen and that's great for you, but then what are you going to do for the next 28 years after you become partner, right? It's not a race. You should really focus not on the time it takes to make partner, but how you're making partner, in the sense that you're making partner at a firm or a situation that really supports your lifestyle, whether it's work-life balance and your career goals. You're making partner in a group that you people that you respect. You're making partner in a firm that has clients that you really want to work for and that you want to see succeed. Those are the things that really should be the focus. And it's hard to kind of think about it because you're seeing your other colleagues make partner before you, or things like that. But really, longevity as a partner is really kind of based on not how fast you make it, but like where you're making partner and how you're treating it, and making sure that you have all the tools and that you have the pathway and the work and support once you get into partnership. So, the best advice I can give you is, if you're a junior associate or a 3L, 2L law student coming into practice, don't get discouraged about a law firm saying no to you, or if you get getting laid off. It happens for a reason, and what you can control is how you kind of react to it, and your perspective and your attitude towards it. And if that blip in your career makes you become partner 2 years later, that's fine, and it's always going to be fine, and you're probably going to be better for it. And so don't rush into your first job. Don't rush to make partner, because you've got plenty of time and your career is going to be very, very long. So, it's easier said than done, and it's perspective that I've gained over time that I certainly didn't have when I was just graduating. But it has rung true to date.
I think that's wonderful advice, and I amen all of that. Well, Dan, I just want to thank you so much for giving me your time and being so open and honest with me and our listeners today. I know they will get a lot out of this conversation. I have gotten a lot out of this conversation, and I want to thank you again.
Absolutely. Happy to help and happy to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.